Health in Scotland has been the #1 domestic problem since the 1950s. High unemployment, poor housing and a widening gap between rich and poor are the major contributors to the problem, according to the experts. David Walsh from City Council Centre for Population Health and the author of the report investigating Glasgow effect carried out the study comparing Glasgow to Liverpool and Manchester, cities with similar history and economic situation.
Those analyses showed that levels of poverty, deprivation were actually very similar, and even when you had adjusted for any remaining differences, premature deaths in Glasgow were about 30% higher. And deaths at all ages were about 15% higher. Even once you take into account differences in poverty, there still remains a higher level of what is in effect unexplained higher mortality. So the question then is what's going on?
David Walsh says there have been about 18 theories trying to explain Glasgow effect scientifically. They included the popular argument about vitamin D deficiency, which allegedly affects physical and mental health of citizens, but there is no sufficient evidence for any of those assumptions.
Because it wasn't a clear answer, everyone and their dog had a theory, had an opinion. We did a lot of work in which we tried to summarise all the different potential explanations and assess them in terms of whether they were plausible, what evidence there was out there, and that work is continuing at the moment.
The best way to see whether poverty is really affecting health situation is walking down the streets. The bustling city centre gives an impression of a prosperous, thriving economy. It's a completely different world if you go a few miles to the east. It's the world of poor living conditions and a totally different social behaviour. Suburbs of Glasgow show concentration of premature deaths due to alcohol, drug intake and suicide at young age. Residents believe that the budget of the city is not distributed fairly, and problems of the suburbs are simply ignored.
The city centre, there's a bit of hit and miss. Like the Buchanan Street's a lovely street, and there is a lot of there's Charles Rennie Mackintosh buildings and everything like that. So there is great architecture in certain areas, and in other certain areas it's a bit more run down, and there needs to be more money pumped into the economy than what's getting spent on certain things.
The council's comment is that the government is not ignoring the problem.
It's very aware of these issues. The smoking ban is one that was introduced first in Scotland. Scotland has a problem with alcohol, and so there's been a great effort to try and tackle that by means of minimum alcohol pricing. So I think there's a lot of credit to be given to the Scottish Government in terms of recognising the problem and trying to deal with it.
The government would need an economic leverage to fight the inequality. It is the reason why the independence referendum is so relevant to the discussion about health in Scotland.
The powers to narrow income inequalities lie mainly with the UK Westminster Parliament and not with the Scottish Parliament. Then it's limited in its powers to tackle those big economic factors.